Welcome back to MSExamLab. In this video, we're doing something a little different. We're issuing corrections to our DP-600 practice series. 2 answers were wrong, and 1 needed a clarification. Now I could have quietly swapped a slide and said nothing. But that's not how you build trust, and it's not how you learn. So instead, for each one, we'll read the full question, look at every option, explain exactly what went wrong and why, and then walk through the Microsoft Fabric concept behind the correct answer. By the end, these 3 questions will be the ones you never get wrong. And I'll be honest about how they slipped through and how every answer is now verified so you can trust what you're studying. Every answer here has been re-verified against Microsoft Learn. Let's get into it. Our first correction is from episode 10, question 2. Here's the scenario. You plan to query sales data files that are stored in an Amazon S3 bucket, and you want to query them by using the Lakehouse SQL Analytics endpoint. You need to recommend 2 things, a file format and where to create the shortcut. Take a look at the 5 options on screen. Option A, create a shortcut in the Files section. B, use the Parquet format. C, use the CSV format. D, create a shortcut in the Tables section. And E, use the Delta format. It's a select 2 question. Pause here if you want to think it through, and then we'll reveal it. So here's the fix. In the video, we chose B, the Parquet format, and D, a shortcut in the Tables section. The location was right, but the format was wrong. The correct pair is D, a shortcut in the Tables section, and E, the Delta format. Here's why the format has to be Delta. The SQL Analytics endpoint can only query Delta tables. When a shortcut in the Tables section points to Delta formatted data, Fabric automatically recognizes it as a table you can query with SQL. A folder of plain Parquet files is not a Delta table. It has no transaction log, so Fabric never registers it as a table, and the endpoint simply can't see it. Picture it concretely. Your S3 bucket holds a folder of Parquet files. You point a table's shortcut at it, open the SQL endpoint, and nothing shows up. No table, no error, just an empty catalog. Convert that same data to Delta, and the table appears instantly and becomes queryable. Parquet feels safe because Delta is built on top of Parquet files. But here, Parquet and Delta are 2 separate options, and only Delta gets auto-registered. Let's slow down on the concept, because this one distinction answers the whole question. A lakehouse has 2 areas, the Tables section and the Files section. The Tables section is for structured data. Shortcuts there must be at the top level, and if the target is Delta formatted, Fabric recognizes it as a table automatically, and it becomes queryable by both Spark and the SQL Analytics endpoint. The Files section is different. It accepts any format. Shortcuts can sit at any level, but nothing there is registered as a table. Spark can read those files directly, but the SQL endpoint cannot see them at all. Now, what actually makes a Delta table? A Delta table is Parquet data files plus a transaction log, the folder called Delta log. That log is the thing that turns a pile of Parquet files into a real, queryable table. It tracks which files are part of the table, the schema, and the version history. Take the log away and you just have Parquet files which the endpoint won't treat as a table. So when you see Parquet and Delta as separate choices, remember, Delta is Parquet plus that log, and the log is exactly what the endpoint needs. One more useful detail. If your source really is plain Parquet or CSV and you need it as a table, Fabric's shortcut transformation can convert it into a managed Delta table for you. And keep in mind the SQL endpoint is read-only. It shares the same engine as the Fabric warehouse, so it queries Delta tables but never writes to them. Let's go option by option. Option A, a shortcut in the Files section, wrong because data in files is never surfaced as a table, so the SQL endpoint can't query it. Option B, Parquet, wrong because a plain Parquet folder is not a Delta table, so Fabric doesn't auto-register it. Option C, CSV, wrong on 2 counts. It's a slow, row-based format for analytics, and it's still not a Delta table. Option D, a shortcut in the Tables section, correct. That's the location where shortcuts are auto-discovered as tables. And option E, delta, correct. It's the only format the endpoint recognizes and can query. So the answer is D and E. Here's the rule to carry into the exam. Whenever a question routes data through the SQL Analytics endpoint, two things are locked in. The format is delta, not Parquet, not CSV, and the location is the tables section, not files. So if you see an answer that says Parquet or a files section shortcut for endpoint querying, you can rule it out on site. The same rule shows up again and again on this exam, so bank it now, delta plus tables. A quick gut check: if the data can't become a delta table under the tables section, it doesn't belong on the SQL endpoint at all. Our second correction is from episode 12, question 2, and this one hinges on licensing. Here's the scenario. You have a Power BI Premium per user workspace, that's PPU, and it contains a semantic model. An app called App1 modifies row-level security through the XMLA endpoint. Right now, App1 makes each user sign in with their Microsoft Entra credentials. You need App1 to use a service account instead, and the question asks what you should do first. The options: A, add a managed identity to the workspace; B, modify the XMLA endpoint setting; C, upgrade the workspace to premium capacity; and D, add a managed identity to App1. Pay attention to that one word first. Here's the fix. In the video, we said D, add a managed identity to App1. That is not the first step. The correct answer is C, upgrade the workspace to premium capacity. And here's the reason. On a premium per user workspace, an app that uses the XMLA endpoint must have each user sign in. It cannot use a service account or an app identity to act on behalf of users. That's a hard limitation of PPU. Only a premium capacity workspace lets an app use a service account without per-user sign-in. Think about what would actually happen if you followed the video's answer. You add a managed identity to App1, you point it at the PPU workspace, and the connection is refused because the platform doesn't allow a service account against a PPU model over XMLA. The identity is fine. The workspace tier is the blocker. So you move to premium capacity first, and then the identity work makes sense. This is why the word first in the question matters so much. It's telling you there's a prerequisite, and the prerequisite is the capacity. Let's unpack the concept, because the license tier is the whole answer. Premium per user, or PPU, is a per user license. It is not a capacity. It does give you the XMLA endpoint, but when an app talks to that endpoint, PPU requires each user to sign in. There is no service account and no unattended app identity. Premium capacity in F or PSKU is a dedicated capacity. It also gives you the XMLA endpoint, but on top of that, an app is allowed to use a service account or a service principal with no per-user sign-in. So the trigger phrase in the question is use a service account. A service account means nobody signs in interactively, the app runs on its own, unattended, and that is exactly what PPU forbids for XMLA apps. This is a really common exam trap. The question dangles an identity or a permission fix, but the real gate is the license tier. The moment you read service account on a PPU workspace, the answer is get onto premium capacity first. Two related settings often appear alongside this. The tenant setting that allows service principals to use the Fabric and Power BI APIs, and the XMLA endpoint being set to read write at the capacity level. Both of those live on a capacity. One more reason PPU on its own can never get you there. Option by option. Option A, add a managed identity to the workspace. That isn't how an app authenticates to the model, and it doesn't lift the PPU restriction. Option B, modify the XMLA endpoint setting. The endpoint is already read-write, which is how App1 changes row-level security today. Toggling it doesn't enable a service account on PPU. Option C, upgrade to premium capacity. Correct. This is the required first step because only a capacity allows a service account. Option D, add a managed identity to App1. You may well do this eventually, but it's useless while the workspace is still PPU. So the answer is C. The rule to remember: premium per user plus a service account or a service principal over the XMLA endpoint. That combination is not allowed. You must move to premium capacity first. Whenever a question puts an app or a service principal against the XMLA endpoint and the workspace is premium per user, the licensing wall comes before everything else. Identities, endpoint settings, and permissions only matter once you're on a premium capacity. Read the license tier before you read anything else. The order is simple: capacity first, identity second, permissions last. Finally, a clarification, not a wrong answer, but something we should have shown differently. This is from episode 2, question 8. The scenario: you need a date dimension that covers the year 2010 through the current year and there is no existing source table for it. How should you populate it? Option A, populate a view by using T-SQL. B, populate it with a copy activity. C, populate a table by using a data flow. And D, populate it with a stored procedure activity. In the video, we presented this as a single answer, C, but in fact, both C and D are valid. Here's the key idea: since there's no existing source, the dates must be generated, not copied. A data flow, option C, can do that with low code. Power Query M can generate a full list of dates from 2010 to the current year, for example with a list of dates expanded into rows, and load it as a table. That's the choice we highlighted, and it's correct. But a stored procedure activity, option D, can generate exactly the same range using T-SQL, a loop, or a recursive query that inserts one row per day. That's a second, equally valid way to meet the goal. Now, why not A or B? A copy activity moves data from a source to a destination, but there's no source here, so there's nothing to copy. And a T-SQL view can't invent rows either. A view only reflects data that already exists somewhere. So the two approaches that actually generate the dates are the data flow and the stored procedure. Both should count, which is why this should have been a select-all question. Here's a handy sanity check. If a requirement asks you to create data that doesn't exist yet, look for the options that build rows, that's generation, and eliminate anything that only reads or moves data that's already there. 2 takeaways here. First, when there's no source to copy, you must generate the data, and in Fabric that means a data flow or a stored procedure. A view or a copy activity can't create rows out of nothing. Second, always check whether a question is single answer or select all. When two methods both fully satisfy the requirement, like the data flow and the stored procedure here, a well-written exam item will let you choose both, so read the instruction line and count the checkboxes before you commit. Let's pull it all together. Correction 1, Episode 10. To query data through the SQL Analytics endpoint, use the Delta format with a shortcut in the Tables section, never plain Parquet, and never the Files section. Correction 2, Episode 12. To let an app use a service account over XMLA on a premium per user workspace, you must upgrade to premium capacity first. A managed identity alone won't do it. And the clarification, Episode 2. To build a date dimension with no source, you generate it, and both a data flow and a stored procedure are valid ways to do that. 3 questions, 3 concepts you now own. And that's the full set of corrections. 2 answers fixed, 1 clarified, and to be completely straight with you, every answer in this series has now been re-verified against Microsoft Learn, question by question. Corrections like these only happen because you watch closely and comment, so thank you. It genuinely makes the content better and it makes you sharper for exam day. If honest, documentation verified exam prep is useful to you, subscribe and drop any answer you'd like me to double check in the comments. See you in the next one.